You're listening to the Missionary Perspective Podcast with veteran missionaries Eric Johnson and Joshua Mead. We're glad you could join us. We trust this podcast will be both a blessing and a challenge as we relate topics in world evangelism from a missionary perspective. Now, here's Josh and Eric.
Welcome to the Missionary Perspective Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Johnson, and today is a very special day for me. When Josh and I started this podcast a little over a year ago, there were a handful of names I had on a list of people I wanted to have on the program, the podcast, to interview and talk about missions. And this is one of the gentlemen today. And so I'm going to have the great joy today to introduce our podcast audience to Jeff Buckman. And you get to hear his testimony, to hear some of the things he's been involved in over the years, especially in the area of missions, and to see how he, now as he's transitioning different parts of his life, how he still has focus in his life on missions. And but today is kind of a sad day. But Brother Jeff has one fault in his life, as I'm concerned. It's that he's a Philadelphia Eagles fan, and I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan. So, of all days for us to get together on a podcast, Brother Jeff, what a day, huh?
We're celebrating, and we're not feeling a bit sorry for the Cowboy fans. So last night was a great game. We had fun. A little hard getting up this morning, after being up so late last night. But other than that, it was a great win.
No, it's true. Growing up, I never met a Philly fan I liked, but then I met Brother Jeff and a bunch of the friends out there at Valley Forge. And so my Philly hate has really gone away over the years. So I'm glad that these guys are happy today. And it's funny, I was thinking about this, Brother Jeff. You know that I have kind of an interesting memory as we were talking here. Brother Jeff holds one of the few people that I know that have been in the home of both of the podcast hosts, Brother Josh Mead and my house. And so there aren't very many people in the world that can say that. And so today we want to talk about someone that we know both very, very well, who has a great testimony when it comes to the area of missions and really has been in part of many different facets of missions, between helping on mission boards, going on missions trips, encouraging missionaries. And so we're going to talk about that. And then towards the end of our podcast, we're going to dive into Brother Jeff. The last couple of years, he wrote a book that is very encouraging, that we will talk a little bit about some of the principles the Lord has taught him over the years. But kind of to set the scene, Brother Jeff, let's just talk a little bit about you and who you are. And I sent you a list of some of the questions ahead of time, but we kind of want to find out. And I've heard your testimony because you've been in our home and with a work group and told a little bit about it, but I think it's a very interesting one. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you grew up and how you came to know the Lord?
Oh, yeah. It's always a good story to see how someone's come to know the Lord. I was in high school, had never been in a church. And in high school, I met a young lady, and she invited me to go to church with her. And through attending for 4 or 5 months, through the messages at that local church, and then her witnessing to me, she led me to the Lord. And that same young lady has been my lovely wife for almost 47 years now. So we ended up getting married, and but that all started back in high school with an invitation to church. So I thank the Lord for her, and I thank the Lord for the way that He led and directed me to Himself.
Yeah, that's a really neat testimony. I remember, I think we were on our carport having a lunch, and one of the neat things that Brother Jeff and his group do when they're together is they give their testimonies. And I think on that trip, Brother Jeff, there were a number of men who had been come to know the Lord through their wives, their future spouses who had invited them to church. And so that was a real neat trip specifically. Now, with that in mind, you grew up in that area in Pennsylvania. But you grew up in a household that wasn't necessarily a Christian household, but you guys were a hardworking household. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the background of your family and their businesses?
Sure. My dad started out in the plumbing and heating commercial contracting business, and then he started a second business in selling swimming pool chemicals, just a retail store. And then the swimming pool chemical store was empty in the wintertime, and there's a local ski area. So back in the 70s, pool chemicals in the summer, ski supplies in the winter. And I was drawn out of the plumbing and heating business to do the retail side of the business. But when I go on mission trips, I still enjoy doing plumbing and heating. I'm sometimes tapped upon as okay, you're the plumber. run the pipes here. But back in the 70s is when just a small ski shop at that time and a small retail pool chemical store is what we started with.
Now that was your family. Now, as the time went on, your father decided to give up the businesses and kind of divide them between you and your brothers and sisters. Is that correct? And then at that time in your life, the Lord started working on your heart as far as the direction you wanted to take the businesses, maybe different than your brothers and sisters.
Exactly right. So when I was 30 years old, my father passed away with cancer.
Mm.
So then the plumbing and heating business was run by my brother and sister, and I ran the ski shop and the pool shop. And the Lord blessed the chemical side, the pool chemicals. We got out of retail pool chemicals and got into wholesale packaging. And back in those early days, it was myself and one other employee, and now counting part-time employees, certain times of the year, there's 500 employees. So the company has grown over these decades. But in 2001, the Lord led us to separate the businesses family-wise. So I obtained the chemical side of the business, not having my brother and sister as part of that business. So I had chemical and ski, and they had the plumbing and heating. And it was at that point in time that I realized, okay, the Lord can use the business for himself. And it was kind of a light bulb going off, so to speak. I'm a Christian. I'm now in business by myself. I can use the business for the Lord.
All right, so let's talk about that a little bit, because you go into this a little bit in your book. But this is kind of the point in your life where you realize, I think you mentioned you only had a few employees at the time, and we'll talk about that number because that's always very interesting to me, where you started and where you ended up. But the Lord gave you kind of a burden to start not just normally tithing and giving to your church, but to use your businesses for His glory. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Well, yeah. So the reality is, it sets in that it's a responsibility, really. It's easy when you have a paycheck and you bring the paycheck home, and well, Lord, you want us to tithe, you want us to give to missions, you have special projects perhaps that you burden our heart with. So that's one responsibility, but then it's another responsibility when you realize, well, the business is the Lord's as well, and what do you want us to give to from the business? So over the years, we establish a giving budget with the business based on those same principles as a household, really. And then we give from the business to various missions projects. The Lord hasn't directed us to support missionaries on a monthly basis, although that certainly would not be wrong. But He's directed us to give towards various projects. So that's what I look for is giving towards anything that the missionaries might need. And there's quite a variety of lists, really. There's the computers or cars or land purchases for a church or a building project, but then there's other things that come up. There's maybe an emergency health need where the missionary needs to get home quickly to be with an ailing parent or a loved one, or college students that they miss and they want to see during Christmas break or something. So there's just a variety of different things, but that's what we look for to give from the business.
And we don't want to go through all the details because we want you to read the book. There's a lot of detail in there and very encouraging. I think throughout the years, as Brother Jeff and I have met together, it's always been encouraging to me to hear the creativity that the Lord allows him to think about in different ways that he can help out missionaries and pastors alike. It's not just missionaries, but pastors as well, and people in need. We won't go into the details, but there's some in the book that I think are really neat, how maybe other business people wouldn't have thought of these ideas, and how the Lord allowed them to just be a great way of provision in the area for other people. Now, let's go back. When you start these businesses, or when you take over these businesses, we're talking just a handful of employees. And over the years, as you, through your different businesses, had generously given, and I think, if I'm not correct, you also gave jobs out to a lot of times to people who are in the ministry or transitioning from the ministry. Is that correct?
Sure. Yeah, there's been various folks that have needed a job while they've been studying, or perhaps I can think of a local pastor that came to us and said he's taking over a small church, but he needs 4 days of work a week. And then as time went on, he said, "Well, I'm going to reduce to 3 days," and I reduced to 2 days. And okay, the church can support me now, so I can go full time. And so yeah, there's been various things, and we always have need for good workers, so we can get creative and help that way. And there's been missionaries that have their young people that in the summertime need employment, so they might know someone locally, and their young person can stay with them and then work for us. And so yeah, we just look for ways to help by providing jobs. And even then locally for believers that live close by, I have some business friends that say, "Gee, I'd never hire someone from my church because I'm afraid if it doesn't work out, I'll have to see them all the time." And boy, we've hired over the years literally hundreds of people from our church. I can think of 2 times it didn't work out. It was more because it was kind of my fault, really. I hired them because they had a need, and I put them in a position that wasn't really ideal for them. And in both cases, they came to me and said, "Hey, this isn't really working out." But boy, it's worked out many, many times. Believers should be and are great employees.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things I can say about Brother Jeff. Been on various missions trips together, and he and his wife Nancy are usually the hardest workers, and that really sets a great tone. And so, if you know that up front and you go to work for him, you better be willing to work hard. So that's great to hear. All right, now over the years, as this is growing and your businesses are giving more to the Lord, giving more to missions, to other pastors, was there ever a point where you, or maybe people in your employees, who said, all right, what we're doing, that's quite enough? Or was it something that was kind of contagious and it's, hey, let's just keep going forward. Let's keep looking for more creative ways to give?
Well, contagious is a good way to put it. Yeah, I never really thought about doing more business to make more. It's more, let's do more business so that we can give more. And I remember one time, this was years ago, but my brother-in-law came to me and said, "Isn't this enough? Like, what are we doing?" And I said, "Well, it just seems to be that the Lord keeps sending us customers, so we'll keep on serving them." But it truly allows us to be able to give more and more to what God has placed on us to give to. So yeah, it's kind of exciting. It gives us a front row seat to see what the Lord's doing in ministry, not only in the Dominican Republic or Senegal, but really all over the world. We have examples of what God's doing. It's exciting.
Well, I remember one of the first times we had this conversation talking about that, and at the time, I believe it was hard to imagine, that was actually 2014 when you were here on one of your trips. And we had and still have a number of people in our own church that are store owners. And I had Brother Jeff give his testimony and talk about this. Now, this was 2014. I know recently he's kind of given up some of the leadership of his businesses. But at the time, I believe when he started some of the businesses or took over from his family, he was in the neighborhood of maybe 20, 30 employees. And at the time in 2014, the employee number was, I want to say 300 or 400. Is that correct?
Let's see, 2014. That would probably be about right.
Or even more recently.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a fair amount of part-time employees in the wintertime. We have 7 ski shops, so there's a fair amount of 20-hour-a-week employees. But there's a fair number, about 160 or so full-time, 12-month-a-year employees. And then the other time of the year, in the summertime, we have about 100 part-timers, and in the wintertime, there's about 350 part-time employees. So customer service is key for us. So we just need to make sure we have enough staff to be able to get the job done. Yeah.
Well, I know that was very encouraging to us, and especially to those who are hearing the testimony, especially men who, had recently come to know the Lord. And that's kind of one of the things I think Brother Jeff has done over the years that I can tell just from afar, is that he's not only set the standard or set the way that the Lord has allowed him to go forward and be generous with his businesses, but he's taken others alongside who are business owners and tried to encourage them to do the same because of the blessings the Lord provides. And so we're going to talk about that in just a minute here when we talk about your book. But in between this time, the Lord allowed you to start going on missions trips. And so why don't you talk to us about some of the first missions trips you went on and what the Lord started doing in your heart that now I'm guessing there have been over a couple dozen mission trips you've taken.
Sure. Well, we started it was in the late 90s. We were asked to go along and help as cooks on a youth missions trip to the island of Bonaire. We went along and helped and certainly had a great experience. And then the next year, the pastor asked if we would run the trip. And I remember chatting with him. I said, no, we won't. We don't want to run the trip. We'll go along and help. Because I really need somebody to organize it and run it, and I think you'd be good at it. Would you pray about it? Well, okay, I'll pray about it. So prayed about it for a week, and the Lord just said, hey, you should do this. So for the next 2 summers, we led the youth on the missions trip. It was a 3-year. Every summer we would go to Bonaire. So that next year, the second year, we led it, and the third year we led it, and they were both great experiences. And then when we went to Valley Forge Baptist, we were asked what do we like to do ministry wise. So I mentioned mission trips, and that we've done 2 or 3 mission trips a year through Valley Forge as well. They're really mostly all adult construction trips or vacation Bible school trips or both. Sometimes we do both. But yeah, it's become a really an important part of our life. Really, we enjoy the short-term trips. So we have Gambia coming up in March. We have Papua New Guinea coming up in August or September of next year, and then back to you next fall.
Yeah,
we're
very excited about it. We're very, very excited about that. So what specifically, as you started going these trips, you have a business back home. I'm sure you have many commitments and responsibilities. You're not called to be a missionary or pastor, but as you would go and you would lead people on these trips, what specifically do you feel like when you would go that the Lord encouraged you in that you wanted to keep doing it?
Yeah, so it's an encouragement to the missionary just to have fellow Americans, so to speak, come and be with them and spend time with them. Not, as a couple, so we have like on a construction trip, we'll have a few ladies come along to help with the food, and they help encourage the missionary's wife as well. So it's an encouragement to them. It's a major encouragement to the local believers. Some work with us on the work team, and others will work if it's a VBS on the VBS. We try as much as we can to get as many of the local believers helping us and working alongside of us. And even though sometimes you can't speak the language, you just communicate, through motion or describing things that way. But you just have a great time, and it's an encouragement to the local believers. And it's very encouraging to the team. You get to be good friends when you serve together, and when you serve together in not necessarily normal environment. So you get to have that in common. And some of my best friends are from our mission teams. We just and then there's another aspect of a missions trip. When that missionary has a need, or that missionary has an event in their life that may not be real positive, if they have a health need or something, and when their request for prayer comes back, boy, everybody on that missions team is praying. So there's just a number of different aspects of the missions trips they're just a positive thing.
There really is a kinship that you build on missions trips that I'm sure, obviously it's in a smaller, different circumstance, but there's like when you meet people who were in the military together they had just have a camaraderie. You see that very similarly when you go on missions trips.
Yeah.
So that is a very, now I know that you have a million stories. I remember a story specifically about where you and the river had a situation, and I know you came out ahead on that one. What are some more interesting, fun stories that you remember in some of the far-flung places of the world you've been to?
Well, you've got me started on that river one. So, but I can think of a time in Vanuatu when we were doing it was a VBS for kids. We probably had, I'm going to say, maybe 125 kids coming out every day. And then there was another team that was building a church. And you have to realize, in the jungles of Vanuatu, a church is not, it's posts with a roof, but we sunk the posts in the ground, built the roof, and then had the first church service. So the locals invited the whole team, including the VBS team. There was 27 of us that went on that trip. We had pastors that were giving pastor clinics as far as going over different topics that pastors deal with. But all 27 of us, they had come after the first church service. They had a meal, and it was just a National Geographic moment. These nationals in loincloths and village dress, and just chanting and singing in their language, praise to the Lord for building this church. And then we had a feast, and we didn't really know exactly what we were eating, but it was cooked underground, and it was just a very it's just a moment that I'll remember really the rest of my life. So that would have been in Vanuatu.
I think it's funny. I think one of our mutual friends, Brother Kevin, was showing me some photos from that trip and explaining that. And I think that had a great impression on him as well.
Oh, all of us. Yeah, all of us.
Oh, my. Well, that's a great thing to be as an advertisement to those who are considering going on missions trips, is that the Lord will allow you to be a part of a team. You'll grow. You'll be encouraged. You'll know how to better pray for your missionary. But you also have experiences that you will cling to for the rest of your life. So that's really special. Yeah. Well, what you've hosted, or not hosted, but led many, many trips. You've dealt with many, many missionaries. This podcast, the majority of people who listen are missionaries, whether young missionaries or veterans. And I can say that we have hosted many missions trips, and there are very few that are as well prepared as your church. From the side of the missionary, what's a way that, you a lot of times are coming in with 15, 20, 25 people. Maybe you could give some tips, because I'm sure you've had experiences, and we're not trying to single out anybody in their bad experiences, but maybe learning opportunities for the missionary who's going to host a group that's maybe even a good size. Some tips that maybe you have seen people drop the ball in the past, so it would be an encouragement to say, make sure you're best prepared in some of these areas.
Sure. Well, there's really we've learned over the years, and we've done maybe 30 or 32, 33 missions trips, and we learned early on that the missionary has so many things on their plate to do. It's just you chief cook and bottle washer. So we try to organize things on our side. We realize that missionaries have had bad experiences where teams have come and they haven't worked hard. They've wanted to come and be on vacation. They want to go sightseeing. So we tell our teams, in the very first meeting, that's not what we're going for. We're going to work hard, and we're going to work hard. And oh, by the way, we're going to work hard. We're there to serve the missionary. From the missionary standpoint, we try to send material funds for them to buy the materials. So we send those funds well in advance. So that way, we realize that they have many things to be doing, so they can work that into their normal schedule. But we send little reminders, do you have the materials? How are the materials coming? Do you have the materials? Just to make sure that when we get there, the materials are there. So that's well. And then we try to communicate as best we can. For some reason, construction guys like to eat. I mean, they just put away the food, So we try to communicate as best we can. We'll send as much money as you want, for food, but let's feed these guys. I do remember on one missions trip we were on, day one, it was kind of like, okay, there's not a lot of food here. What are we going to do? So we all got together, and when you go on a trip, everybody packs some snack bars and maybe some beef jerky and stuff. So we all put it. We said that night when we were all together, I said, okay, let's put all of our stuff together to see what we have. So we then dispersed that every day, kind of like on a ration basis. But that was the only thing I would say from a missionary standpoint. Don't be bashful on asking the team that's coming for food funds, and then just stuff them, because they're working hard, and they just want to. But
lots of carbohydrates, right?
yeah. Keep them going. Yeah.
All right. Well, good. All right. Well, so with that in mind, let's make a transition. So through all these experiences with the businesses and your missions trips, now a few years ago, the Lord or someone inspired you to write a book. Why don't you talk a little bit about your book? And the title of that book is "Making Your Business God's Business." Also available on Amazon for $8.99. A little plug there. Why don't you tell us, how did that come about?
Well, a couple of missionary friends and pastor friends. So Pastor Joyner at Valley Forge, for a few years, he was saying, hey, Jeff, you should write a book so other business guys can see what you're doing from a business standpoint. And my comment back was, well, I'm not doing anything special. This is what Christian businessmen do. You go, no, it's just a little different. So then a friend of mine, Mike Herbster from Southland Christians Camp, and Andrew Bonnell, who's with Biblical Ministries Worldwide, and David Hasselfluck, all with their wives. We were on a ski trip together, and throughout the week they were saying, you should write a book, and I just discounted the same thing. I'm doing the same thing every other guys are doing. No, you're not. No, you're not. So Friday night of that trip, we had a dinner reservation. We showed up half an hour early. We didn't realize we were showing up early. So we're sitting in the hotel lobby, and they said, we need to get serious with you. You really need to write a book. I said the same thing. They go, you're not getting it. God wants you to write a book. They go, okay, you're putting it that way. Will you pray about it? So I prayed about it. I am the last person to write a book. How can I do this? I don't have time, different excuses. So I finally decided, well, Lord, I guess you want me to write a book because these folks are coming to me, and I get it. So I dedicated plane rides to be writing the book, and different trips I'd be on. Instead of watching the movie or, kicking back, relaxing, I would just be tapping out chapters. And then good friend of mine, David Hasselfluck, edited the book. And it's not a big book, but God's used it, because I've had business guys call me and various things, hey, this has helped in this area, that's helped in this area. So God's using it. There's no doubt about it.
Okay, Brother Jeff. And so what's the response been like with family and friends and others with the book?
Well, shortly after it came out, I was just praying, well, Lord, I hope you can use this. And within a week, I had a Christian business guy call me and say, I've always given to the Lord from my income that comes to our home. I've never given from the business. I never thought of that. And I'm thinking, Pastor Joyner saying, other business guys don't do what you do, came to my mind. Right. But there's been various examples like that. And there's been opportunities. Maranatha, I'm going out there in the spring, meeting with the business class. I've met at Bob Jones University with their business group. There's just been various things. Probably every 2 to 3 weeks, I'll get an email. A fellow in Florida, he contacted me and wanted to know if he could call. And so we hooked up, and he just said, hey, I just want you to know your book has given me direction in this area and in that area, and thanks for writing it. And yeah, it's been surprising, really, because I just thought that that's what Christian business guys did. But hopefully the book will just give Christian business people an idea, one or two things they can use as they serve the Lord with their business too.
It was very encouraging on the trips you've been on. There have been two specific gentlemen who've helped. One was an engineer who actually spoke some English, so you could have a lot of communication with him here.
Yeah.
And I was able to give him that book, and I know that was very inspiring to him, and really, I think, helped him along in his very young but Christian life. And then it's very interesting that as of today, we're starting construction on our third church building. And the gentleman who helped build the second building, which you met in your group, through interpreters, were encouraging him to come to know the Lord. And at that time, he was interested, but he didn't come to know the Lord at that time, but eventually did. And just the other day, we were talking, and he's very excited to see you next year because the Lord has really just transformed his life. And so it's neat how sometimes, we can have impact in people's lives, and it takes time. But other personalities, other testimonies can have a big impact. It's not always pastors and missionaries. It can be lay people who come and have just an encouraging spirit, encouraging testimony. And so I think that's neat. I think it's encouraging for those who are listening. And as we wrap up, Brother Jeff, maybe cite one or two of the principles that are kind of things that, we're not going to give the whole book, but principles that you've mentioned in your book that Christian business people should put into practice when it comes to generosity with the resources that you feel like every Christian businessman should know.
Well, there's really a few things that come to mind, but every Christian business person should be giving from the earnings of their business, and so that's kind of a given, I think, but I'm finding it's not. But another area would be just the services that your business provides. So when we have a pastor or a missionary that's in our area, and we find out that they're a skier or a snowboarder, we'll send them to one of our stores and say, what do you need? And help them get furnished with the latest and the greatest. But we're, from a pool chemical standpoint, we'll take our products and go to Christian camps and supply the pool with chemicals. And we couldn't do that in years, when years ago, we'd say, hey, we can provide the chemicals at cost. And then as time went on, we said, hey, we can provide it at half of our cost. And then a couple more years, we said, hey, it's yours, just take it. So you have to watch, you can't you
don't be wise.
You have to be wise in how you do that. But I think not just for business people, but just really every believer, God's wired us with certain talents and things that we're good at, and we just need to be busy using them. So, it could be in your local church, helping with Sunday school. It could be helping in the kitchen, or, cleaning up in the church, or whatever it might be. From a business standpoint, business people are wired differently than pastors and missionaries. So we can give advice where they might be asking for advice, and just using what God's given us. It's not necessarily a monetary thing. It's more time and talent, and being willing to give that, because the Lord's given it to us. Why shouldn't we be willing to help out in ministry wherever there might be that need?
Well, Brother Jeff and I had spent a lot of time together on these missions trips, and I thought I knew him pretty well. But boy, this book really, I learned a lot about him and his creativity in his businesses and giving to the others and giving to the Lord. And so I want to encourage everybody to go get that book, Making Your Business God's Business. And like I said, you can find that on Amazon. And I encourage you to buy that book, read it, and maybe get a couple copies for businessmen in your church. It's like Brother Jeff said, it's not a real long read. It's a very easy read, but just really filled with exciting stories, how the Lord had used them mightily in people's lives. And I will say this, one of the neat things about Brother Jeff, if you get to spend time with him, he has a very great personality, but his generosity is very contagious to others. And we've been firsthand examples of not only his generosity, but his encouragement to others. And I would say that is something that is great for missionaries, is to encourage people to learn more about how, not just to give the missions, but to encourage missionaries. I know after learning some of the principles that Brother Jeff has done, we've actually implemented some of those in our own personal life. And I just think everyone can learn from this, especially maybe people you know in your life. And so go on to Amazon, order that book, whether it be Kindle or hard copy, Making Your Business God's Business. Brother Jeff, thank you so much for your love for missions. You give so much of your time and your efforts and your treasure to the Lord. And the real star of the family we didn't get on today, Miss Nancy. She's the one that really we know. She's the nuts and bolts of everything. She's the hardest working lady I've seen on a work missions trip. You don't want to mess with her. She knows what's going on, and she loves the Lord. She's a great teacher. She's helped many times with Holly here on the missions trips, and we probably didn't give her enough credit today, but we know that she's right there by your side all the way.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't be able to do it without her. She covers a lot of bases for me, and we're both just thankful, and we praise the Lord for what He allows us to be involved with. It's exciting. Really.
Well, we thank you so much, and we ask the Lord to continue blessing you in your future travels, your future trips, and all your endeavors. And listener, we want to thank you for listening to this podcast. I hope it's an encouragement. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions. Josh will be back next week, and we want to say thank you for listening to the Missionary Perspective Podcast.